right, we have hit record, and as always, we got to figure out what the hell we're going to talk about. Um, this will be near and dear to our heart. I want to talk about the habit of getting better at Agile, and this specifically, but um, I think SDLC, but I think Agile in particular. I think there's some good habits we can do there. And it's a little bit on the lines of learning, but I think we can talk a little bit about some things that you can do, some habits that you can take, that you can have that will help you be better at Agile, even if you don't have a full team or even if you're not doing it. But it's things like hitting on those rituals and honestly just looking at the Agile manifesto and thinking about keeping some of those core pieces in mind while you're doing your development, because I think that is I think would help a lot of people, even if you don't do like Scrum or anything like that. But I think going through the main, keeping some of those things in mind are, I think, highly useful. And I think there's some ways that we can do that. Almost like when you did for a while where you had your alarm that would go off. It's like, are you being busy or productive kind of thing? Is that kind of some of those regular sanity checks?
Yeah, I like that. And that kind of flows with some of the conversations we've had this week about agile and ceremonies. And I also threw two out there, which we could probably discuss next time. But I had like utilizing AI and then using virtual environments.
Let's see. What are you thinking on utilizing AI? Have we
Um,
not talked about it yet? I guess we haven't, have we?
no.
So what are you thinking?
Uh, Kind of like we had the conversation one or two back about like how to Google, like maybe go through some habits of like what are some daily things that you could start practicing with AI to see if they're to help streamline or automate your processes.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so we'll do that for the second one today. Yeah, because we're gonna get close. We got Yeah. After this, after we're done, you can figure out when we're gonna have to start our Christmas specials, because I think those are coming up. That may be
That's
next
next week.
week. I think next week we'll do our Christmas specials. So
Yep.
cool. So AI to end the year is actually probably not a bad one for the most part, or probably end the year. So I like that. And I'm just gonna wing it on the good and the bad because I always do, because that takes too much thought. All right, let me throw a little more light on the subject if I can reach.
Make sure your notifications are off.
Make sure notifications are on so they beep all the time. That way people know I am around. Thank you. The nice thing too is I only have focus for so long, so it's like, all right, once it comes back on, we got to wrap this sucker up. Three, two, well, hello and welcome back. We are continuing our season of building better habits because we are building better developers. You, on the other end, are developers that we are building better ones of you. We are helping you help yourself become better, whether you're actually a developer or not, because there are a lot of developer related things that we've found are very useful, even if you're not by title or trade a developer. Technology is everywhere, and there's a lot of these tools and things we discuss that are going to help you do a better job, essentially, of making technology your friend and finding a way to use it. This episode, we're actually going to talk about one of those things. A little spoiler alert is we're going to get into the world of Agile a little bit, or Agile, depending on which side of the ocean you live on. And that is coming up soon. But first, I need to introduce myself. I am Rob Broadhead. I'm one of the founders of Developreneur, also a founder of RB Consulting, where we help you, just sort of like this is, instead of just building better developers, it's more like building better businesses. We help you leverage technology, take what you've got and take what's out there and find a good mix of that so that you become more efficient at what you're doing. Through integration, automation, simplification, we find ways to take that sprawl of technology and turn it into something that is a nice, pretty little thing that helps you drive your machine faster, cleaner, better than a regular tune-up. In this world of challenges that we have put together, I I'm gonna throw, because I keep coming back to it. I love the Pomodoro thing, doing just a little bit. One thing that like Michael has talked about is the struggle of keeping them small and actually like, doing 25 minutes, stop and move on. And one of the things I've played around with a little bit is having like a long and a short Pomodoro. So I've had some where I'll just say, you know what, I'm essentially going to do effectively like two back to back because in a 25 minutes, it actually works really well. Goes back to old school blocks of where you had basically 50 minutes and then 10 minutes before you went to your next class. And I've tried that a little bit. I want to say that has worked out actually really well. It is sometimes a little bit of a stretch to get that 50 minutes before somebody interrupts me, but when I do, it's actually been very productive. Another one of the things is gone back to the building a brand. I've gone back to that several times, working on the brand, working in my business instead of on my business, and have found a lot of little tweaks. It's actually sort of a downside because a lot of it is generating a to-do list for myself because I'm like, oh, I got to do this, got to do that, got to do this, got to do that. But it is getting me at least back into it and getting me to refresh myself on some of the things that are out there. Another one that's on the to-do list, it's been really a interesting one, as I said, as I really struggle because I have daily to-do lists, but I have sort of expanded that out a little bit because I'm trying to think of that, those two or three things I want to do every day. I'm also, instead of doing my daily list, is causing me to go back and look at other items that I've got on like my general backlog of stuff to do and things like that, or just revisit in some cases. I'll look at things and go, you know what, I haven't thought about this in a while. For example, I had not really looked at my Amazon server allotment of stuff, and a little bit of something that got me in there reminded me that I hadn't really reviewed stuff in a while. I started looking in there and I'm probably going to save myself, I don't know, not a lot, not a ton, but at least 10 or 20 bucks a month, maybe more than that on servers. Plus, I actually will have more servers for less money. So there's like some bonuses there because I was looking at, that's why I was looking at licensing and making sure, like I do for other businesses, making sure that I'm making the best use of the licenses and the technology that I have. So it's a little bit of drinking from your own cup kind of thing, or practicing what you preach. Good things, bad things. Good thing was I took a whole weekend off. Basically, I got to hang out, went to a different city, did a whole lot of different stuff. Were just fun time, fun times, fun times. The bad side of that is I was exhausted by the time I got to the end of the weekend. I was actually looking forward to going back to work this week because I needed a break from having too much fun last weekend. Now, I did not have that with Michael, so he's going to share his story around all of this. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Michael Meloche. I'm one of the co-founders of Developer. Also, I am the founder of Envision QA, where we help businesses build software customized and tailored to their needs. If you're struggling with your current software stack or you don't have a software stack, you don't know where to begin, give us a call. We'll help you figure out what it is you need and build a solution that works for you. Good and bad. Let's see. Good. Uh, we're getting closer to Christmas. I'm getting back into that holiday mood. Starting to watch the feel good Christmas Hallmark movies. Kind of putting me back in that good kind of mindset for the holiday. Bad, which will go into kind of our challenges. I was doing really good with the Pomodoro technique and kind of staying on track, small little iterations, and following a plan of things to do until I worked on building this little server idea I had for a project I'm working on. And what was probably a really decent estimate of about a day's work to build any type of server from scratch when you're definitely building hardware machines, not cloud based machines. There's always that little intricacies you run into. And this one kind of went from, okay, it's almost there to next thing I know, I'm 24 hours in, just spent 16 hours straight plowing my way through to hit a brick wall that basically we had to pivot. We hit something that just the solution was not going to work at all for what we wanted. So we had to pivot. Downside was the fact that I spent 16 hours straight, literally glued to my machine, because it's like every time I turn out, I almost got, look at the clock, it's 4 hours later. All right, I think I'll get, nope. So bad habit, good habit. Go back to that list, go back to taking the Pomodoro and say, take when you do get to your breaks, also take a moment, maybe if you're on multiple Pomodoros of the same issue, set a goal or a check, kind of a sanity check. After four of these, should I continue or do I need to pivot? So that's kind of where I'm at for our challenges. Beyond that, everything else is going good. Typically I'm following the Pomodoro really well. I've actually been really cranking it with automating things, so I'm keeping track of what I'm doing because I'm building servers, and we typically have to replicate. So everything I have, I'm taking and I'm just converting it to a script so I can run on the next machine. Or now that I'm back in the cloud-based world, we'll just take snapshots as we go and be able to spin things up quickly. So keeping that in mind, that'll save my sanity, hopefully going forward. And it will save yours if you keep track of what you do and see if you can automate it.
Now, this actually leads us into the word, using that word pivot, leads us into the world of Agile, which is one of the things that is a strength of the Agile approach. Now, the interesting thing about this and why I felt like this was a good building better developers, building better habits kind of thing is one, I think a lot of people don't know what Agile really means, is that they have all of these like they say it's pair programming or it's sprints or something like that. And Agile is actually meta to that or predates that to some extent. I guess it doesn't even predate it. They got merged somewhere and they are a little bit different. However, this does touch on things like which is part of the challenge. We're going to touch on things that are really more in the Scrum world and some of the ceremonies and things like that go on because we're going to talk about building better habits. Now, I want to start with reiterating there's four main values that are what the Agile Manifesto puts together. And if you ever want to look at it, agilemanifesto.org, it's out there, it's been there forever, it's very easy to read, and it's very actually insightful as a developer. It's one of those things like we've talked about the 4-hour work week and some other things out there that we revisit on a regular basis. And I think the Agile Manifesto is one as a developer you should, because it's going to help you, I think, often be a check of like, am I doing this? One of those kinds of things. Am I doing this? Am I doing it right? Now, the four values are, they said that, they've sort of the preamble is, hey, we're a bunch of developers. We've built a lot of systems. And this is what we've learned. And these are the four: individuals and interactions over processes and tools. As far as these are the things that we have come to value. So individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And responding to change over following a plan. Now, that last one is a perfect example of what Michael just ran into, is that there's sometimes, particularly when we get into the software development world, if you're in the waterfall world, sometimes you're sort of stuck. It's like you've got to plow through, you've got to get this thing done because there are downstream issues that you have to worry about. Because you built in the requirements, it's there, everybody's counting on it, all of that kind of stuff. In this Agile world, there are some things that, yes, there are requirements that are they're loosely required, tied to this thing. So he can look at it and he can say, you know what? This is taking more time than we needed to. It's more complicated than we needed to. It's not what we need or whatever it is. And he can change. And that's exactly what Agile is about. Is it's not necessarily about, hey, we've got this plan, we've got to execute, we've got to do all this stuff. We can change on a regular basis. We are, I used it several times when we were going through some of the lectures about it. It's a difference between laying out a yardstick versus having, like, let's say, little 6-inch rulers and using that to get to your point. Because the yardstick, once you lay it down, you're going from point A to point B, that's it. Your path is covered. But if you've got these little 6-inch rulers that you're doing along the way, you're like, hey, I'm going to go here for a while. Oh, maybe I'm going to go here. Oh, I'm going to go here. You may go off in a completely different direction than you originally planned on it, because the world is ever changing, as they say. There's always things that come up. Your customers may change your focus. The the budget for a project may disappear. The goal, the scope of a project could change dramatically. And I've seen that on numerous projects, and that's why you do sprints, is you sort of go in, you plan somewhat. I mean, you're planning like a sprint or two or three or four ahead, maybe. But generally speaking, you're still staying loose and flexible in how you approach things. And I want to put that in, and I think that actually fits with sort of the daily, for example, the daily to-do list that we talk about. Is that yes, we've talked about having like your career roadmap, which is obviously going to span many years. It's going to span decades. Versus we talk about annual goals and quarterly goals and monthly goals and things like that. But when you get down to that daily, that does allow you on a given day to pivot. It is, in a sense, it's an agile way to look at things. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into the habit side of this and the challenge side of it. But now I want to sort of throw this over to Michael and get some of your feedback and your thoughts along this and where you want to go in this agile discussion because we're agile like that.
Yeah, it's funny, like your yardstick versus rulers. It's a really good analogy. And when you were saying that, what popped in my head initially was not necessarily software, but the bridge collapse in Baltimore. So you had a direct path from A to B. Well, if something fails and it collapses, what do? You can't really pivot because you have this one path. But if you have multiple paths to get to somewhere, if one's blocked, you can go somewhere else to get there. So that was just a funny analogy because we watched so much of that collapse when that happened. Um, and that sticks with me a lot, especially with the agile process, because even though like I ran into that situation where I was stuck for hours. It was one of those, though, where at the end of the day, it wasn't a critical failure. We could pivot, we could move on, we could do something else to still keep the ball moving. As we work with ceremonies and try to work to our daily routines, especially with teams, everyone kind of has a different process or different ceremonies as to how they work with Agile. And you and I have talked about this many different times because we kind of have different approaches to this. And it's kind of funny because at the end of the day, we're still trying to do the same thing, but you're fighting, like, especially corporate, you're fighting that too many meetings mindset sometimes, where it's like, do we really need a meeting to talk about? In the agile sense, yes, because the ceremonies are designed in such a way that we keep that ball moving, we keep the process moving. If anyone's got any blockers, we work through those issues and we can pivot, we can move forward. And then you get away from that kind of waterfall approach that Rob mentioned, where you have to plan everything out first. And then, this is our path. We can't deviate. We have to get there. But life changes. It's like, I don't know if anyone's still on Windows 10. You're probably getting pop-ups constantly telling you that, hey, Windows 10 isn't going to be supported anymore. You need to upgrade. Well, oh, your machine isn't supported. Now you need to go buy a new machine. These are things that can help be planned for and avoided with like Agile. You just plan things out, but you plan them out in a way that puts working over, kind of like you said, like planning out all the documentation first. You kind of get a idea of what it is and you start writing it, start building it out. Although there's times I'll push back on that. Like if we're starting a project, sometimes you do have to do a little bit of waterfall to get enough information from a customer sometimes to figure out what they want. Now, granted, sometimes their ideas change and you'll pivot a lot on that. That's where Agile comes in. But sometimes certain things do require a little more planning up front. So it's a little more waterfall-ish in the requirements phase. But once you get to the development and the start putting things together, that's where Agile comes in. That's where you start really using that ruler versus the yardstick approach to get things from point A to point B faster. And I guess what I was kind of curious because you mentioned the customers versus contract, kind of the third value that you mentioned there. What are some examples of that? Because I have not really touched upon that too much with the agile experiences that I've worked with.
So that is one that I think is it tends to be more of, I guess, in a as a development manager or things like that. But really, the customer collaboration over contract negotiation is, for lack of better terms, it's nickel and diming on either side of it. So what happens is that we can get into situations, and it's really if you've been in a larger organization or if you are in a larger organization where there are things like change requests and things like that that go on. And even if you're in a small organization or if you've got a side hustle or something like that, there is in any given contract, there is going to be potential for change requests. Somewhere along the way, there's a scope change or something along those lines. Now, the thing is, and this actually gets into the whole idea of like fixed bid projects versus hourly and some things like that that are a whole different soapbox that I can get on and lecture about and wax poetic about. But it really comes down to working with your customer to give them to get to a win-win situation. It is working with them to give them something that is valuable to them as opposed to getting into a fight over a dollar or a dollar amount even, because it's the kind of stuff where it's like, yes, you want this thing that's going to cost $10,000. And instead of getting into, them saying, well, we could probably afford $9,000. And you're like, no, well, how about 95? Instead of getting into the contract negotiation and spending all of that time trying to agree on what you're building, you could spend that time building the thing. A good example is I dealt with somebody that was not, there was like a slow pay situation going on. And they're like, well, I'm just not going to, I'm not going to work for the customer because they're not paying. So I'm not going to do the work. And it's like, well, all you're doing is just kicking stuff down the road. You're actually hurting yourself as well as them because now you're not doing the work. And so now you're going to have to come back. You're going to have to ramp back up. And now the customer's not going to be happy because they're not getting what was promised. And so, instead of addressing the problem in that case, they ended up saying, well, I'm just going to pull back. And it's a negotiation strategy, but maybe not a good one. You might agree or disagree with that. But instead of going to the customer and saying, look, you're not paying on time, I'm delivering on time, we need to work on that. And then figuring that out. And instead of, beating them over the head, like a good example a lot of times in that case is like, if you don't pay me by this day, then we're going to stop work completely, or we're going to shut down all the servers or whatever it happens to be. And instead of getting into these like, us versus them mentality, the customer collaboration is when you're like, look, we're all working to get this thing done. And if you come into a project and you're doing it for the money, you're just doing it because like, I see dollar signs and I just want to get paid, then don't do it. You will never be a better developer if you do that. I guarantee you, because you're not doing it to be a developer, you're doing it to earn some money. If you want to do that, that's fine. But listen to us, keep listening to us, because maybe you'll sometimes see the light, but don't think that is ever going to make you a better developer. It's going to make you maybe a better negotiator or salesman or something like that. But it's not about development at that point. The contract negotiation is all sales and that kind of stuff. Customer collaboration is where you're sitting there with them and saying, hey, you have a problem. We want to solve it. And there's always a budget. There's always a reality there. There's a certain level of how well you can solve that problem. And so it's working with them to figure out, okay, maybe we can't solve it 100%, but maybe we can get you 80% there. Or maybe we can't give you the Porsche solution that you think you want, but you're going to find out that the Kia, no offense to either of these cars or manufacturers or anything like it, but maybe like you just need the Kia solution because you don't need all that other crap. And there's a lot of that. This goes back to, again, something I can preach on for days because people will end up buying software and spending money on stuff they really don't need. They never use it. And so they have all these features and all these things that they're not using. Why spend extra money to get there? Why get stuck into contract negotiations and wasting time over things that you really aren't going to use anyways? And this is on both sides of it. It is as a developer working with the customer, and as a customer, hopefully working with the developers to realize that you guys are on the same page or you guys have the same goals. You have the same desires. We should all want If you're being a better, if you're here, you're building better developers, you do. You want to build software that people use. And so it's not as much about the bucks that are involved. And I think most of us would take a successful project at 10% less of what we could have earned, as opposed to a failure of a project where we earned an extra 20% bonus somewhere along the way. That's those. And I'm very happy that you asked that, because I do think that's one that as developers, we don't think about it in those terms as often, because we'll get in and argue with our boss or the other teammates or things like that about, well, this has to be this color, or that has to, we have to use this standard, or we have to use this, this data value, or whatever it is. We have all these little nitpicky things. So while this is talking about at a customer level, I think we often get lost in the details as well. And it's like everybody's argument is fine. You're better off just picking one and moving forward than you are spending time arguing. So, one, did that answer your questions? And then thoughts on that?
Yeah, that answered my question, but it gave me a follow-up question for you. So, not to detract too much from the agile conversation, but within that contract negotiation or kind of working with the customer, kind of like arbitration, things like that, to keep things moving forward, because we always do want to provide better services, to make things better. At the end of the day, we want to provide them something that is better than what they have, even if it's just cleaner code. But within the contract negotiations, not necessarily as you're going on about pay, but at the beginning. So as you're in that research phase, that deep dive into the requirements and flushing out what they need, how do you avoid getting into the trap of what they have versus what they need, to kind of get that happy medium to within the conversations? Kind of for a odd comparison is where, oh, I want this button up here and I want it to be purple. It doesn't matter. You just need a button that works. What is your suggestion to our listeners and viewers to kind of avoid that early on, not necessarily later, but at the beginning, so that you kind of can still provide the benefit, but maybe not at a higher cost that you wouldn't initially want?
This really does come down to I think you win and lose this actually at the beginning of a project, at the initial phases, because what you want to do with, now, if it's a customer you've worked with, it's different, but somewhere along the way, there is the start to the relationship. And if while you're building up that in that initial phase of building that relationship and figuring out how you're going to interact with the customer, if you build trust and help them understand that there are things that they need to bring to the table, and there are things that you bring to the table, and for them to trust you where you're in your lane and you trust them when they're in their lane, then I think it does help those things. So for example, let's say you're going along and they're saying, there's a couple ways to approach that, where you show them something. Let's say you've got some mock-ups for this solution that you're going to build for them, and you're in the negotiation phase. Essentially, they're trying to figure out, what do they want, what don't they want. And this is a good example, because at this point, what they want and what they don't want should not come down to a purple button. There's certain functionality they need. There's a problem they need solved. So this goes back to our favorite, what is the why? Why are they actually doing this? And so if they bring up something like that and say, hey, this needs to have a purple button there. Now you could say, you fool, you are not paying attention to what you need to be paying attention to. That will probably not win you a contract or Nice Guy of the Year award or Gal of the Year award or anything else like that. But what you can do is, which a lot of times you can start with the positive approach, where you just say, okay, a lot of times, and this is a great one, what is the business reason for that? What is the business logic behind that? Why does that need to be purple? Why does it need to be there? Because there could be a legitimate reason. There could be something where they're like, we've got a person that is colorblind and can only see purple, or something like that. Or if, it could be something weird, like the sun shines at that spot at a certain time of the day, and if it's not purple, then we can't. Just random stuff. But if you don't know their business, and you don't, like they do, then they may be able to bring you something. But I think it's often frame that as what is the business reasoning behind that? Because if it's just, they say, and sometimes they'll say, well, there's no reason, I just like the color purple and I want a button there. Then you can go to, well, what is the benefit to you of that being purple and being there versus it being pink and over on the other side of the screen or something like that. And if they ask, if they just say, well, I'm the customer and I want to do it, then you say, well, I understand that, but I'm trying to be a good consultant, or I'm trying to be a good vendor for this solution. And when you maybe that you say that, that actually adds a cost potentially. It adds a cost, or it's something else we have to check, or it's something that's going to be makes this more complicated than it needs to be. And so we just want to ensure that you really are stepping into this knowing that you are adding a complexity to this solution. And I don't have to see why. I just want to make sure that you understand that you've done it. So whatever your reasoning is, if you don't want to explain it, that's fine. But if you do explain it to me, then maybe I can help you with alternate solutions or help design this better in other areas, because I'll find out, for example, that you love purple buttons. Okay, cool. I'm going to make buttons purple wherever I want you to click on them, and I'm going to make them green because you hate green wherever I don't want you to click on buttons or something like that. I mean, there are things that we can do based on even the most, for lack of a better term, irrational likes and dislikes of a customer. As we can use that, we can leverage that and make a custom solution for them. And so this goes back to, this is a customer collaboration instead of, you don't need that, or something that is very much like, now you've got a brick wall and you guys are having to argue. You're on the opposite side of the customer. You're coming alongside them and you put your arm around them. You're like, that's a pretty cool button. What is the value of having it there, or something along those lines? And so now you're working on the collaboration side, and you're working to build their trust and help understand that you want them to be happy. You want them to be satisfied with what comes out, but you also are guarding their core idea of, there's a problem to be solved and they're spending money. And so we want to make sure that you are spending money wisely as much as we can. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question as well?
Yeah, you actually answered it in a very agile way. I love that because it was a great solution. And I really liked how you turn it around to, how is the, what is the value of this to you? Yes, I don't need to fully understand it, but you just need to understand the cost. That was huge. Or to me, that's one of the big takeaways from that, along with the collaboration, because we do want to be there to provide a solution that the customer wants, but in a reasonable and cost effective way. Now, if they want to pay for it and that's absolutely what they want, you put it in there. You just do have to make sure that you communicate the cost and complexity to the customer, because they don't understand software, or in most cases, your customer is not a developer. So when we do talk to them, it can't be in tech speak. It has to be in common language that they can understand, and that also isn't talking down to them, so that when you are communicating, it makes sense to both parties and you can, for lack of a better sense, collaborate on the solution versus hammer and nail.
And that is really where Agile comes in, is that part of that too is we don't have to make the decision on that button right now. If we're in the beginning of a project, we don't have to make that decision. You can basically just say, we're going to leave, fine, cool, we'll leave it there, no problems. And then you can always come back later down the road and then fight that battle if it even needs to be fought. And maybe that screen never exists. It may be that button never exists. It may be that customer gets fired and somebody else gets hired. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that could go on that will change it. And so that's where the agile side is like, we don't have to die on a hill at the beginning of a project. We can say, sure, and we can go with the flow until we're far enough along. And then we've got something that is much more concrete to fight over, as opposed to some sort of just like, vague ideas that we have of how this thing will look. Now, the challenge side of this, because I think a lot of you are like, wow, this is about, big things and stuff like that. The challenge I have for you does go back to the daily tasks kind of thing. Is I want you to at the beginning of a week, take a look at, build a few tasks up. So essentially, like tomorrow, what are you going to do in the next 7 days? What are you going to accomplish in the next 7 days? And I want you each day and you can pick, one big goal or two or three big goals or something like that. But in each day, you're going to make progress towards these things. So not something you can get done in one day. Let's think of something a little bit bigger that you want to do. It may be one of the other challenges we are. And then put that on a list. And actually what I'd like you to do is start with, I'm going to do this at, a certain time, certain window block every day. And see how many days you can do that. Is it more difficult to figure out that time and schedule that thing out and do it at the same time every day? Or is it easier for you to adjust when you do it? And now this is hopefully going to get you into that mindset of things that I think for developers, we often are like, this is what I feel, this is what I thought, this is how I have to go. Instead, this is going to help us break that habit or that mindset and realize that, hey, it doesn't have to actually flow the way we originally did it. It can go in a different direction. It can evolve. It can change, because that's where you're going to become a better developer and have some really good habits about, getting used to being agile, changing, being more light on your feet in a professional sense. That being said, you are not allowed to be agile at all. You need to go directly to your email and send us something at info@developreneur.com. Let us know how things are going. What do you like? What don't you like? Let us know how your challenges are going. That is actually very interesting to us. And especially if there's any insights or habits or anything like that you're building, that you're finding that this is something that, particularly if it's something that we've helped you build this habit because of the challenge when maybe you were, challenged by it before. For example, the Pomodoro thing and some of the things that we've learned as we've gone through these challenges as well. You can also leave us comments wherever you're seeing this, whether it's out on YouTube, on the Developer channel. You can go wherever you're get your podcast. There's a way to leave feedback and all that kind of good stuff. We really, rank us however you want to, but give us a 5 or 1 or whatever the review is. But it's really more about the content. We want to hear from you. And also, we've got a form out on developreneur.com, so you can get us there. They're at Developreneur on X if you want to send something out that way, or if you just want to follow us. That being said, we have got to follow ourselves on to the next episode. So go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time. Bonus material. There's a lot of bonus already in there. I don't know. We've overdone it a little bit.
Well, I just wanted to throw out, because I know we kind of talked about, individual individual processes versus tools and things like that. But there are still some good agile tools out there like Trello and Jira that kind of give you that swim lane type approach to being agile, to keeping track of things. So if you aren't really familiar with agile and just need kind of a visual way to get started, look at things like that. Because sometimes, especially for me, seeing the swim lanes and seeing where things are and how things are broken down really helps me keep track of things. Whereas, if you're not and you're more just a process driven person, then, go for it. It just, if you really just don't understand agile, sometimes that's a good way to just get started.
That's actually a great area for bonus material, both processes and tools, because processes is one that this is near and dear to my heart. I'm working through that with a team right now and building out processes and trying to figure out how to change some and mindsets and things like that. And there's a lot of stuff that we want to implement, but it doesn't always make sense. For example, the world famous change control and stuff like that, where you have to have a ticket and then it has to run through all these processes. It has to be QA'd, reviewed, QA'd, blah, 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 blah. So that by definition, a lot of times that means if there's a hot fix, it takes at least 24 to 48 hours to even get that into, done and into production and stuff like that. But then so that process is there for a reason. But like everything else, there are going to be times where you're like, you know what, we need to skip some of this. The tools are the same way. A lot of these tools will lead you towards or tell you that you need to do A, B, C, and you always have to do this. You have to do that thing, or the tool will make you sometimes, because they need to, in order to provide you some of the reporting, they'll make you do certain things. And those you don't have to do that. You can get around it. Now, granted, depends on where you're at your company. It may be that you have to do all of this crap so that this certain report gets built correctly at the end of the day. But if that's not the case, then it may be that you can skip one every so often, and you can just push a task through without it being like this full awesome ticket. Or you can shortcut a couple of things because you're like, you don't have to do all of this flowery stuff around it. You really just need to say, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to fix. Now the tools have gotten pretty good about working with that, a lot of the agile tools, because they have ways to do, simpler versus more complex stories and tasks and stuff like that. But just always, it's one of those, I think, as a keep your head up, and as you're going through things, are you a slave? It's sort of like being productive versus being busy. Are you a slave to the process or the tool? Are you going through this stuff because that's what you were taught or that's what you think it's supposed to be? Or is it actually providing value to the customer? The world famous, like not world famous, I guess, maybe it is now. To me, one of the most famous things that is similar to this, pick any object-oriented language, is that when you build a class, the first thing you do is you write getter and setter methods for everything, for all the properties. So you write all your properties, you write all these getters and setters. Great, awesome. There's tools that can do that. But the thing is, it's like you may not need all of those. So you just did all of that work, even if it's mindless work. And you may think like, I wrote 400 lines of code. Bully for you. That may not actually be code that ever gets used. So keep an eye out on these kinds of things. Also, last thing is agilemanifesto.org. I highly recommend you check it out. We didn't even talk about the 12 principles that they get into, because it really does get into some things that I think you're probably going to be convicted, as they say. It's like the 10 commandments. Everybody's broken one, if not all of them. The 12 principles of agile software, you can easily find probably where you have screwed up on every one of them and where you can make some improvements and thus become a better developer. That being said, it's time for us to motor on, continue to, we're going to be very agile, and we're going to like sprint, pivot, and all that other kind of, all those words, all those buzzwords, but we'll be right back before you know it for our next episode. And we'll see, we'll come up with whatever we're going to come up with at that point. Have a good one.